Okay, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Rocks. I'm going to go ahead and run this program and show you what we are going to be reaching for. At this point, I put this glass button behind each of these. I just changed the file name, or I entered a new graphic image for that. If I drag this guy out, notice that he is shooting the different turrets, or shooting different kinds of bullets. Jack in the Box is shooting bananas, and the giraffe is shooting apples. In any case, this is where the game is right now. And I'm going to make some changes. I want a range ring to appear. When I drag the turret off of the menu, I want a range ring to appear, and so we're going to start that right now. Okay, now we want to go ahead and add a range. I've already created a range object. If I look here in my library, I can drag this guy out to the stage. Notice it's just a white circle. And so this guy has some code. I've already written the code for this. Notice its name in the library is range, also the class name is range. And if I look at the code, it has basically a couple of parts here. I've got range radius, which is going to be an int default value. I could actually set that to 0 because this guy takes an input parameter, and I'm going to set range radius equal to whatever I put in. That's the default value. So I should probably say right here default. But remember, every one of the different turrets is going to have its own range. And so I'm going to set that right here where it says update radius. And here again I can put in a range. Let's go ahead and call this new range. And new range, I will reset the range radius to whatever this new range is. And then range radius, if I multiply that by 2, that's the diameter. So that gives me the width of the range, and it will give me the height. All the range is doing is it's giving me a visual representation of how far away the bullets can shoot. And so each turret will have its own range, and this is a physical representation of that. Notice also here that the alpha is set at 0.25. The alpha is the amount of opacity. 1 would be completely opaque, whereas 0.25 is mostly transparent. And so now if I come back over here to my PhatKids class, I need to input some values. And again, I'm just going to whip through these pretty quickly, but we have right away up on top, we have our range. And so the range now is of type range. And notice it has that input value. So I'll say default range here is going to be equal to 100 units or 100 pixels. And so that's the default, but of course I'm going to change that. I've got my initial bank value for my bank, my point bank. I have a bank value and I have life points, and I have default values set in for those. Also, that was last video. Now if I come down here, I'm going to see where I set these values. And if I come into, let's say, add turret, I've added a few new lines in here. The range, I'm going to update the radius. So let's go back and see. Range actually has an update radius. Okay, so I can send in a radius here. Where am I getting that radius from? Remember, this is that weird relationship between turret, turret settings, and turret 1. So let's review that briefly. Turret is the class that extends movie clip. Okay, turret extends movie clip, and every one of the individual turrets is going to extend turret. And what that's going to allow me to do is all the code that's common to all of the turrets is inside my turret class. Everything that's specific to turret 1, for instance, goes in here. But the thing was, I was passing in so many parameters through this super constructor. This is the guy that constructs the turret class. Remember, the turret 1 is a subclass. Turret is the superclass. And so I was passing in more and more parameters here. So what I did instead is I created a new class called TurretSettings. Notice there's no constructor here. All TurretSettings is going to do, it's going to hold some values, and in this case it's going to hold bullet type and it's going to hold range. Now I create an instance of TurretSettings in the turret class, but when I create a turret 1, it's going to set those values according to what's specific to turret 1. Likewise, when I create turret 2, turret 3, and turret 4, it's going to set those values so that turret 2 will have a different range, a different bullet type, and so forth. So if I come back to PhatKids now and I look at my document class, PhatKids, the range, it says update radius, and I go and I look for the radius where it says T, remember that's my turret, so it says T dot TurretSettings dot range. So if this is coming from turret 1, if T is turret 1, it's going to get the range for turret 1. If T is turret 2, it'll get the range for turret 2, and so forth. And then I add the range. Now the range is just a big white circle, and I'm not really giving it a location here, but what I will do is down here I've got an event listener, and it's going to say set ranger. Okay. Oh, I do have one more range code right here, and that's where I set its visible quality to true. So I think I might put that right up here, so I keep all my range code right next to each other. So I've got my range code here where I figure out the specific range for a particular type of turret. I set the range visibility to true. I add the range. Now I haven't given it a location yet, but as soon as I do this event listener, every time I enter a frame, I'm going to set the ranger. And if I come down here to set ranger, and the reason I called it set ranger, by the way, is that you notice if I just have set range, that turns blue. That's something that Flash already recognizes, and so I'm going to call it set ranger. And all I'm doing in set ranger is I say range.x is equal to turret.x, range.y, and so wherever the turret is. Now remember, I already back up here set the turret to follow the mouse, and now I'm setting the range to follow the turret. So wherever the mouse goes, there the turret goes. Wherever the turret goes, there goes the range. The one other line of code that's really important is right here. When I release the turret, so I'm going to drag this turret out. Maybe I should have this line of code right up above here. And then when I release the mouse, when I have the mouse up button, I'm going to release the turret. And what will happen here is release turret. Before I just had stop drag. Remember up here, I say start drag. As soon as, so I click on the tile, I'm going to go ahead and call this function add turret. I start dragging means wherever the mouse goes, there goes the turret. Likewise, there goes the ranger. But as soon as I have mouse up, I'm going to release the turret, and two things are happening now. Turret 1, I stop drag, and then finally right here, I'm going to set the visibility of the range to false, so it will become invisible. So all that does is if I run the program right now, notice that I get a different range. I come out here, and if I let go, the range seems to disappear. Actually, it's still there, but that doesn't matter. Likewise, this guy has its own range. Notice that the transparency is quite a bit larger. If I wanted to, I could come back here to range and change this to, let's say, 0.75. And what that's going to do, it's going to allow me to take this guy out, and notice that the range is a lot more opaque. And right now, it won't shoot unless I come within that range. So now it will begin to shoot, and each individual turret has its own range value. Let's just take a quick look at that to make sure we understand. If we take open and I go to, for instance, turret 4, let's compare turret 1 to turret 4. So here's turret 1, the range is 100. Here's turret 4, the range is 250. Also, turret 1 has bullet type 1. Turret 4 is going to have bullet type 4. And so what that means is when I create a particular bullet, I'm going to go ahead and have bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, and bullet 4. Okay, so that is kind of in a nutshell what I'm doing with those guys. Notice that also when I create a bullet, it says make bullet. I'm setting in the X coordinate and the Y coordinate of the turret. I'm setting in the range, and now I'm also setting in the bullet number. So if bullet number is 1, okay, then I'm just going to create a new bullet 1. And I have hit points passed in. So if I want to change the hit points of the bullets, if I want to make the bullets weaker, let's say I've set the game up, it's too easy, I can go ahead and reduce these hit points, and it will make the game much more difficult. And so that's adjusting the bullet hit points, the turret range, the cost of the turret. All these variables are going to determine how I set up the play of the game to make a level more difficult or more easy or what have you. All of these things have that functionality built in. Okay, the last piece in this video is we're going to go ahead and set the bullets up so that they have a range, which means that they won't begin shooting until the enemy comes within the range of the bullet, and when the bullet leaves the specific range, according to whichever turret it's being fired from, when it gets past a certain range distance, it's going to automatically disappear. Right now it disappears when it leaves the edge of the stage if it happens to miss an enemy, which we see happening currently. But let's go ahead and change that code. So we'll go back to PhatKids, and in PhatKids, notice that I have added a couple of parameters here. So when I make a bullet now, I not only have the X and Y location of the turret, I have the rotation of the turret and the bullet number, but I'm also going to have a range. So this is new. So I have T, and this was just R before, but I changed it to T rotation because I wanted to distinguish between TR. We have both T rotation and T range. So I made those variables a little bit easier to recognize. T rotation is used down here, so the bullet rotation matches the rotation of the turret, but now I also need to send in the range. The reason I'm doing that is because when I make a new bullet 1, for instance, I'm not only sending it hit points, I'm going to send it the location of where the turret is when it's being created. And to do that, I create a new point, and notice I'm sending in the X and the Y location of that turret. Also, I'm sending in the range of that particular turret. So where do I make, let's back up one more step and say, where do I make the bullet? I make the bullet back here. When I say fire the bullet, I say if parent does not equal null, and the fire delay is below 0, and the distance to the enemy is less than the range. Okay, at that point I'm going to go ahead and fire the bullet. And so I do this make bullet. I go back to my document class. Parent is movie clip. I go to my make bullet, and now I'm sending this guy in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters. And if I look back at that, I see those guys coming in here. X and Y location of the turret, rotation of the turret in degrees, the bullet number, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then finally the range associated with whatever bullet type that's going to be, or whatever turret is actually firing that particular type of bullet. So now when I make a new bullet, I'm going to send in 3 parameters. I'm giving the hit points, but the 2 new parameters are I'm going to send in the location, and this is basically the starting point, where the bullet begins. Since it's beginning at the turret, I'm sending in the location. A turret takes in 2 parameters, by the way. It takes in the X coordinate and the Y coordinate. And then I also have the range for that particular turret. If I'm making this bullet from turret 1, this range will be the range of turret 1, or turret 2, or turret 3, or what have you. Okay, so in any case, at that point, I've got to go back and I've got to change all of my bullet classes to match that. So notice that in the superclass bullet, I'm going to, in the constructor function, have in 3 different parameters. I've got hit points, I've got starting point, and I've got turret range. Also notice that I have to include this import flash geometry. So a point is recognized by flash. It's in the geometry package. And so this guy now is going to be the starting location. And I'm going to say this is encapsulated, so I have variable start position, I have point is equal to new point, and I set the starting position equal to whatever this guy is. Now again, that was the position of the turret, so when the bullet is made, it's going to start there. And so I'm also saying start position. I can get this at any point by just taking this get start position. It's going to return that starting position. Now where I'm going to use that is back in PhatKids. Oh, incidentally, I also had to go through bullet 1 in all of these, so I changed the input parameters. I have 3 input parameters now for my bullet class, but again, for bullet 1, I have the 3 parameters, and I'm sending those up to the bullet class through my super statement. Again, for each of these 4, I'm setting these up so I have 3 parameters coming in for each of the bullets, and I'm sending those up through the super constructor. Okay, so coming back here now, if I look back at my bullet loop, remember where I did bullet loop? I have up here, I had this before. This was the statement, the original if statement that I had, and basically what it was saying was if the bullet, remember I'm looping through all of my bullets, and I'm updating the location of the bullets. And this, by the way, is new also. So let me take this out for just a moment. And what I did before is I said if this bullet, if the x-coordinate of the bullet is less than 0, or the x-coordinate of the bullet is greater than 800, or and so on and so forth, if it goes outside the bounds of my play area, then I'm going to remove it. So I'm going to still remove it, but under different conditions. So now what I need to do is I'm checking to see the bullet, the change in the bullet x-coordinate, the change in the bullet y-coordinate. And the way that I find that is I take, remember this is being updated every time, or every frame, and I'm going to say where's the bullet right now? And I'm going to compare that to its start position. So remember, when I created the new bullet, I'm sending in the same coordinates as the turret. That's the start position, so I can get the start position. Now, the method getStartPosition doesn't return an x-coordinate, it returns a point. And so the way that I access this, I say this guy is going to be a bullet. It happens to be in the array of bullets, it's element BI. And then since this basically gets addressed as a bullet, now I can use this method which is inside every bullet, getStartPosition. But this guy doesn't return an x-coordinate, it returns a point. So I take this whole thing, which is going to be a point now, and I'm taking the x-coordinate of that point and the y-coordinate of that point. And so I take the current x location and I subtract the starting x location. I take the current y location, I subtract the starting y location, and those guys get loaded into BDX and BDY. So this is for the bullet change in x, the bullet change in y, and I get bullet distance is equal to, and this is just the Pythagorean theorem, I take the square root, and this is the x value squared, and the y value squared. So this is just a right triangle. I take the horizontal leg, let's say, imagine a right triangle, and I take the horizontal leg, and I square it. I take the vertical leg, and I square it. I add those together, take the square root, and that's the distance between where the bullet started and where it is right now. And so now, instead of having all of this stuff, I'm going to go ahead and just comment that out, and instead I'm going to say if the bullet distance is greater than, and what I want to do is if it is greater than whatever the range is for that particular turret. So right now I got it set at 200. I'm going to go ahead and change that, but just to make sure this is working, I'm going to go ahead and say run, and I can see I have no errors, and right now all the bullets have the same range, 200. Okay, and now I've got to set it up so that the range of the bullet, right now the apples just disappear after 200 pixels, but what I want to do is I want to match this value so that it's the same as the value of the particular range depending on which turret I'm using. So since I'm in bullet, every bullet knows its own range. If I come back up here, this bullet has a range, which is a number, and so I can use that guy here. I'm going to go ahead and set up, again, a variable, and I'm going to say bullet range, which happens to be the same as the turret range, but I'm going to set that guy up as a number, okay, and he's going to be equal to, let's say, starting off equal at 0, and now I'm going to say this guy, which is bullet range, is going to say set equal to turret range. So the bullet range is equal to T range, and now I have access to that value. So let me go ahead and set that up correctly. Whatever my turret range is, I'm going to make that equal to my bullet range equals to the turret range, and then I just have to set up a getter down here, and I'm going to say a public function get bullet range, or maybe I'll just say get range. And so now, instead of returning hit points, I'm going to return bullet range. Since I'm already returning a number, that's fine. And so now, if I'm coming back here, instead of this guy being set equal to 200, I can take my bullet, which is going to be this guy, and I can just go ahead now and access the range. to get the range, I say dot get range, and that will get the range for that particular bullet. Let me check and make sure that that does in fact say yes, get range. It is public. It's going to return a number, which is the bullet range. And now, if I've set this up correctly, when I take this guy, he's got a range of 500. So now the apple will go a total of, either it's going to hit the enemy or it's going to go for a total length of 500. That way my bullets will match the range of each particular turret. This guy's going to have a much smaller range, and so on. So that's how that's all going to work, and that's it for lesson 13. Bye-bye.